I think the coming of the king brings the coherence that this wisdom literature otherwise lacks. All of these elements are available in Jesus' teaching and his gospel. In this king, you see not only one who lives by wisdom, you see wisdom herself. You see the rock on which we can build so that our lives don't fall to ruin. Let's just look at one chapter in the Sermon on the Mount. And it's worth noting that that sermon happens at the top of a mountain where the disciples have come up and Jesus is teaching them. The disciples are like Moses, and Jesus is like Yahweh, instructing the disciples not just on how to be faithful themselves, but also how to lead others in faithfulness as lights shining on a hill. In chapter 7, he dispenses the words of a sage on the left. Beware hypocrites who mete out judgment and advice but don't live up to their own standards. Beware those who cast pearls, maybe those pearls are the goods of God's kingdom, before swine, people who have no use for them or have no way to use them. And beware the swine themselves. Beware the many who are on that wide and easy road to destruction, the fools. Beware false prophets who are wolves posing as sheep. And beware those who heed false prophets. Beware those who plead Lord and Lord while ignoring the will of the Father that Jesus has come to do. And beware those who build on anything besides the rock of Jesus' words, because you don't want to live in their houses. Their houses will collapse when the storm comes. Every one of those bewares in this chapter is contrasted with a be. Who are we to be instead? We are to be doers to people as they would do unto us. We are to be doers to ourselves as we would do to others. Instead of throwing away what's valuable, we should seek what's valuable and ask our trustworthy Father for good things. Instead of joining the many who are on that wide road to destruction, we need to be the few who enter by the narrow gate, who strive to be on the hard way that leads to life. Instead of being false or listening to those who are false, we need to be doers of the royal will of our Father in heaven. And rather than building on sand or living in buildings that are on sand, we need to build on the rock of Jesus' words. All of that ought to sound like wisdom. It ought to sound like those old traditions that we've looked at from the Old Testament. Only Jesus is delivering this wisdom with a twist. He has authority beyond that of the scribes, and it astonishes the crowds because something greater than those scribes and Pharisees is now here, the King himself, whose very words are the rock to build on. What does that make him? Not just the coach who dispenses wisdom, not just the one who trains judgment, but the judge himself, the king himself, and the wisdom that the coach dispenses. Jesus is in all of these roles. So he is not just the subject of a narrative, he's also the object of a metaphysic. He is all of the things that otherwise seem not to hang together. The presence of the greater thing, a metaphysical presence, offers the fullness that each of these writings reflects partially and on which they depend for fruitfulness. And I really mean that they depend on him for that fruitfulness. Anyone whose life too narrowly conforms to one of these writings is headed for trouble. Someone who relies on Proverbs and its kind of straightforward picture of results is going to be disappointed sooner or later. Anyone who just lives Job is going to interpret suffering through its paradigm of righteous suffering. Anyone who just channels everything into worship through the Psalms or through any form of worship is leading, this is going to sound strange, too narrowly worshipful a life. I think we know that in other spheres of life. We know that a coach is going to give us a lot of conflicting rules, and we're going to need to know when which rule applies in which context. A repair technician has a lot of tools on the bench. One tool is not going to do all the jobs, not even a multi-tool. The Bible's wisdom literature is a great toolbox, but it takes the right technician to know how to use those tools well. And Jesus is just that technician. Jesus fulfills the moral and even the shape of each of these writings. He personifies its good life. He endures its trial. He suffers its bad life for us, for the ones he came to save, and he fulfilled its goal. As I've already said, Jesus doesn't just lead the good life, although he does do that. He doesn't just show us the way. He is the way. He is in person the good life. Look at how Jesus in the New Testament fulfills every vision of the good life in each of the writings we've looked at so far. If Proverbs is the model, then Jesus is God's primordial wisdom, the woman in chapter 8, through whom all things were made, whom John 1 is alluding to in the Word through which all things were made, becoming flesh and dwelling with us. The wisdom that he reveals is so counterintuitive, so foolish, that it exposes our wisdom truly to be folly, to fall far short of what is genuinely available in him. His presence opens our eyes, illuminates our path, and actually paves the way for us to become those heirs of his kingdom that the Father longs for his Son to be in the book of Proverbs. If Ecclesiastes is our model, then Jesus is the way out of Ecclesiastes' windowless room. Jesus' presence and Jesus' work bypass the vanity, the pointlessness of old creation, and he inherits not just old creation, but creation renewed, new creation, a world over the sun, if Ecclesiastes can only see under the sun. Jesus sees beyond it, and he sees the future for what Ecclesiastes is trapped in. If Job is our model, then Jesus is Job to the max. Jesus suffers in perfect righteousness, like Job, but more. And Jesus is triumphant over his humiliated accuser. John 12 puts it this way: when the Son of Man is lifted up, the ruler of this world will be cast out. The kind of death Jesus is to die is actually going to defeat Satan, the way that Job's righteousness and perseverance and God's vindication of Job defeated Satan's accusation that Job would fold under pressure. And Jesus, like Job, is vindicated, he's restored, and glorified, given the name above every name. Jesus is the definitive answer to the question that Satan posed in the book of Job. If Song of Songs is the model, if life is love, then Jesus is the one who calls Israel and the church, who perfects her, and who marries her as her once rejected bridegroom. If the Psalter is our model of the good life, well, Jesus is both the perfect worshiper of the Psalter, the one who voices agony but doesn't give into it, and the worshipped one, the one whom the disciples fall down and worship, and who permits that. And Jesus invites us into his perfect fellowship with his Father in the Spirit. If Daniel is our model of perseverance and truth under pressure, Jesus is not just a faithful servant like Daniel. Jesus is the Son of Man coming on the clouds to judge both the enemies of God and the faithful in Daniel 7. Jesus is the only truly good and wise heir worthy to inherit the kingdom. Revelation puts it as he is the lion and the lamb that are worthy to open the scroll and take the future into his own hands. That Jesus so well suits all these roles demonstrates that wisdom is not some part of a greater framework, whether it's a narrative one, a metaphysical one, let alone a practical or pragmatic one. No, wisdom is no less than the second person of the Trinity himself. Here's a Russian Orthodox icon that shows Jesus having left the throne, which is marked by a cross, so his own glory, to bless and to be identified with holy wisdom, this angel in red. And he, not the angel, has the title Hagia Sophia, holy wisdom. And she is reigning over the world in Proverbs 8. And he over her. And here's an even more striking image where he is Lady Wisdom. The two are one. After all, Paul says, Christ is the wisdom of God. Wisdom fits into no broader framework. Wisdom is herself the framework of the triune God. Here is Jesus in Matthew chapter 11, starting at 25. Jesus declared, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and understanding, and you've revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father. And no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. In other words, illumination didn't come so much by those earlier sources of wisdom. It comes through the only Son who illuminates to some the presence and the character of the Father. He goes on now, not as a sage, but as a coach. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. There is purgation language there. Take off your old stuff and come, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, that is a sage or a coach, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. If we lay down what we can't carry anyway and take up his yoke, he will lead us up to the good life. That's the unitive way, of course, along with the purgative and the illuminative way, all working together beautifully in that one passage. That doesn't make Israel's preparation phase unnecessary. Far from it. The kingdom needs the context of Israel to come in the first place. The Lord needs Israel's history all the way to John the Baptist to make ready for him a people prepared for that king to come. So all that preparation is necessary, but it's radically insufficient. It's only preparation. And that means that also insufficient are any natural law ethics, any ethic of reason, any cultural sensibility or virtue or duty, or any pragmatism that's divorced from the rock of his foundational wisdom. Only it provides the foundation that our ethics are going to need to build on if they're going to last at all. Jesus' virtue, his sacrificial virtue even unto death, his worship even unto death, all finally release wisdom's riches. They all finally provide what wisdom has in store, not just for a few, not just for a select remnant, but to all the needy who will lay down their burdens and come to him and find rest. And we see that happening in the New Testament. In fact, I want to draw attention to the writing in the New Testament that looks the most like wisdom literature, the very Jewish-flavored letter of James, whose wisdom literature for Christ's followers presents the crown of life that Jesus has won as the goal to strive for at Jesus' appearing, presents goodness and completion as the good life that we can enjoy even in part now, presents our passions, this is familiar territory, as temptations, this sounds a lot like Proverbs, and warns us of the bad life to avoid, a life of double-mindedness, of saying, Lord, Lord, but not doing the Father's will, because that will cost us that crown of life. The letter of James shows us Israel's wisdom tradition taking on new life, life that's charged with the life of Christ himself. If James's Christian wisdom literature is our model, then Jesus is the Lord of glory, as he says in 2:1, who brings new life to all of these threads, all of these rich threads of Jewish halakha, Jewish tradition, especially wisdom tradition. And by the way, James pays close attention to Jesus' teaching traditions, especially the Sermon on the Mount. There's a natural affinity here.